Hello, everyone. It's great to be talking to you all. We are live now talking about the art of blending. So hello to you all joining us around the world. It's an absolute pleasure to be presenting at this Boutinot International Wine Festival. And I'm really excited to talk today with 4 of our superstar winemakers from the Boutinot team. My name is Mike Best. I'm a Master of Wine here at Boutinot, and I'm going to be leading this session. I've not really made any wine before in my life, so I'm pleased to be able to defer to my more learned and experienced colleagues on this, but hopefully I can ask them some of the right questions to draw out some of their secrets and learn more about what it is that they do. So this session is called The Art of Blending, but perhaps it should really have been called The Art and Science of Blending, because it is, even though there is a little bit of witchcraft involved in winemaking, a little bit of magic, I think that there's a lot of science and knowledge behind it, which goes into it as well. So definitely a combination of the two. So I'm joined today by the 4 winemakers. So Samantha Bailey down in France, and Eric Monim, the head winemaker of Boutinot, and then JD Rousseau, who is our main man in South Africa, and Colette O'Leary from Hennes in England, which is not far away from where I live down on the south coast. The first question that I thought would be interesting to define, or the first thing to jump into, is what is a blend? And so I wrote down a quick definition. Any Master of Wine essay needs to define its terms well. So I thought that defining what we're talking about is perhaps probably the best place to start. So a blend is not just a mix of 2 or more grape varieties, but can be a blend of vineyards, winemaking techniques, or vintages. And that is not an exhaustive list. There are other things which could go into a blend as well. But important to recognize that it's not just necessarily two different grape varieties that you are putting together. So many wines that are 100% of one variety may also be blends if they are whether it's barrels or not, or whether it's from different vineyard sites or different picking times. All kinds of things can be in there. And then important to think about, why are we blending? What is the reason? So we blend for many reasons, but they could be taste, price, yield, and consistency. So it may be that we are trying to create the very best wine possible, and that's we are needing to maybe add some more structure, or add some more acidity, or add a little richness. Or it may be because we need to try to find a style that is the same year on year for wines that people have got used to the taste of, and these are some of our challenges. So if I could ask each of the 4 panelists to introduce themselves in turn, starting with Samantha and then Eric, that would be great. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself, Samantha, that would be fantastic.
Afternoon, Samantha Bailey, one of the Boutinot wine team. Despite my accent, I am actually based in France, and I'm really loving it. Been with Boutinot for quite a long time now, and the art of blending is very, very close to my heart. So I'm very, very pleased to be involved in this webinar.
Excellent. And Eric, if you could just introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Eric from Boutinot. I've been in this business for 17 years now, and I'm head of wine for the company, and I'm working super closely to Samantha, GD, Colette, and the rest of the wine team as a group of people sharing and mixing their knowledge. I should say blending their knowledge, by the way.
Absolutely. Well put. Colette, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Colette. I'm the head winemaker and estate manager at Hennes Vineyard in East Sussex in England. We are predominantly a sparkling wine producer with some still wines. So we work closely with Eric and the wider French team on the blends. And with the sparkling blends, we're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. So we'll get into that as we go through this session.
Absolutely. And JD, if you could tell everyone who you are, that'd be great.
Good. I'm JD Rousseau. I'm the winemaker from Wildeburg in Franschhoek, South Africa. Yeah, also working close with Eric and the French team, and also with Reino, that's my colleague here in South Africa.
Excellent. Great. I think just before, one important comment to say is that as much as we're talking about blending wines, we do, as Eric pointed out, have the amazing ability to blend this knowledge from across many different countries and producing wines around the world. So each person not only has their own expertise in their own local area, but is also able to draw on the knowledge and the understanding from a team which is working globally, both in terms of production and working with customers and markets around the world. So definitely a great thing to be able to do. So all wines start in the vineyard, and we are going to start there in our talk. So we're going to talk through the winemaking process chronologically, and thinking about where these grapes come from and how that informs the blend, all the way through to the sort of final elements of bottling, in terms of what that means for blending. So we're going to start with a Boutinot staple, something which has been a mainstay of the company for many, many years. And I'm interested to learn from Samantha about how the vineyards play an integral role in the blend for Cuvée Jean Paul Blanc, Samantha. So it'd be interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, Cuvée Jean Paul is an amazing product because it has, as you said, been a staple to the Boutinot portfolio for many, many years. And throughout those years, the aim has been to create a style that year in, year out, day in, day out, remains constant. And that is only possible through the blending process, because we work with a large number of sources, a large number of growers, and then even within those individual cellars, we select smaller cuves that will become part of our overall final blend. So Cuvée Jean Paul is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You have little pieces all over the place, and you have to work out how they will fit together to make the blend that when we bottle in January will be similar to the blend that we bottle in April, and then the blend that we will then do in September, to keep that consistency throughout the year. So as Mike said, the vineyard area has a role to play, because it will dictate the overall profile of the wine, and some of the wines have better lasting power and longevity, so they'll be used at the later end of the blending, while the ones with the freshness and the aromatics will be done for the first bottling. And all of that pulls together because of the experience that we have with Cuvée Jean Paul and with our growers to understand how these wines evolve. So the tasting process is pretty complex. It's great fun, but it's mighty hard work. But I think we can safely say that whether it be the white or the red or the rosé, we now have a range of products that show the art and skill of blending and the advantages that it can give us to provide consistency for our customers. Absolutely.
And I think it's something that is perhaps underappreciated in the wider BWS, the beer, wines and spirits category, that it's not the case that you just turn on a tap, or if a wine is popular, you just make more of it. You only have the one opportunity to do that. And there's that, and we are dealing with something which is at the mercy of nature and the different conditions of vintage, both in terms of yield and quality. And so to be able to do that with the same kind of consistency that people expect for the other products that they buy in the shops is a remarkable achievement. So something that I'm definitely impressed by. And are there different vineyards or different growers who tend to give you different characteristics, Samantha, the same more or less year after year with the Cuvée Jean Paul?
Well, we're within the Gascony area, and we work in the heart of Gascony. So we have three main sectors, and each sector does have a slightly different twist on what essentially the Colombard grape can give. Mm-hmm. So there will be more or less florals, more or less intensity. And that is largely down to the actual soil structure and the yields, but also the influence of the vinification. But in essence, it's more the resulting blend that is important, rather than the actual minute sourcing area, if I may say, Jean Paul.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next wine, which is if this slide will move on for me. Yes, there's Olivier. So it would be really interesting to hear about how this project has come about, because it is an unusual blend in the sense that we don't necessarily see Merlot and Mourvèdre blended together, at least classically, but it's a blend which really works and something that's really impressive in that range. What do the different vineyard areas give you there? Because they're two really different two different grape varieties which require different conditions. So what's the story behind the vineyard area with Les Oliviers?
Let me start by the reason of this blend of Merlot Mourvèdre. Initially, the demand was a Merlot Cabernet Sauvignon blend, and Samantha and I are not the best at Cabernet Sauvignon. I don't know why, but this is not where we have the best of our skills. Let's be honest. By the way, we had at the time a fantastic Mourvèdre, and we thought that the Mourvèdre could be the way to tweak, to play, and to create a blend. Coming back to the vineyard, because this is your question, Mike, that would be interesting to know that we speak about IGP from south of France. And in that specific case, the Merlot comes from the south of France, the Montpellier area, I would say, whereas the Mourvèdre comes from the Gard region, which is Costières de Nîmes region. Clearly, the best Merlot we found was from this vineyard that has let's say, a sea influence on the ripeness that delivers the style, the respect of the grapes. At the other side, the Mourvèdre, which is something a bit more common in the Gard, was just outstanding in the Gard. So definitely, I can't see today making the blend with a Merlot and a Mourvèdre coming from the same region, because, I mean, whereas it's not that far one from the other, because they are just matching together. So, yeah, if we just speak about the vineyard, it came naturally with the wine, but thinking about the vineyard, that's the beginning of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, important to respect what the vineyard is giving you, and when, even though it is a not so common blend, taste-wise, it absolutely works, and we can discuss more about that later. Okay, so let's keeping on a similar theme, but moving a few thousand miles away. We will talk about the vineyards down in South Africa. So I'm going to bring JD in to talk about this South African project from Elgin. And JD, what is it about this vineyard area here that is important for this blend? What are we getting from this style of Sauvignon Blanc?
Okay, so Mike, when we started off with typography, we really wanted to express each region that we work with, and really trying to express what grapes belong, or what grape does well and in that region. And if you think Elgin, you definitely think Sauvignon Blanc, you think Chardonnay. So with this wine, it's 100% Sauvignon Blanc, but we work with producers, about 3 to 4 producers that we keep separate in tank. It's 100% tank fermented, and then each year we will do the blend accordingly to keep like the style and the quality more or less the same. So it's and then also in a vineyard we sometimes pick twice. So depending on the year, so this year a lot of our Sauvignon Blancs we picked 2 times. So the first picking slightly less ripe to give you aromatic, but it's slightly more leaner and natural acidity. And then you pick, say, 2 to 3 ballings later, that gives you more mouthfeel and more body and then you've got these components. Like I think, like Samantha said earlier, I think the biggest nightmare for a winemaker is at the end of the year when you have to do your blending and you don't have these components to work with, and it's literally A and B, and you need to make a wine. So we try to, in a vineyard, try to keep it as nightmare, but try to have a few options when it comes to blending.
Yeah. So I can absolutely appreciate the fact that you need to have more colours, or more, so to speak, or more options in order to in order to inform what you're doing. So, well, we actually have this wine here, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to taste it, and hopefully some people who are tuning in also have this wine. So it has this wonderful sort of citrus freshness and some slightly grassy notes as well. And so this is a typical aroma characteristic for what this style would be. Is that what you would say, JD?
Yes, so that for me is typical Elgin, and on the palate you get this minerality because, as you know, Elgin is quite renowned for their fruit production. So it's on top of a mountain almost, so very mountain terrain. A lot of granite there that gives you that flintiness, that minerality on the palate.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things which you can pay me later, but one of the things which always impresses me about your wines, JD, is that you manage to get a wonderful sense of texture in the wines as well. So even though this wine is the sort of crisp, clean, dry style, easy drinking style of wine, it also has this nice texture and palate weight. And how is it that you're able to achieve that?
It's a secret, Mike.
We'll move on.
No, I think over the years we're not scared to ferment slightly hotter. We're not scared to ferment slightly dirtier the juice, but also I think texture is, for me and for Reino, is a sense of place. We don't try to make a wine that's squeaky clean. I think you lose the varietal, you lose the place, because then it can be a Sauvignon Blanc for all over the world. So I think definitely the texture and the mouthfeel is that place. Not the same wine, but if you look at the Wildeburg Terroir Sauvignon that we will discuss tomorrow, I think that's the wine for me that really shuts that place, that specific vineyard way up in the mountain, and also you get that texture on the mouth.
Yeah. So just in case anybody missed that, those two elements which JD is talking about is that if you're fermenting the wines, many of you I'm sure will know this, but for the benefit maybe people who don't, if you're fermenting the wines slightly warmer, then you will get a broader mouthfeel and less of the sort of obvious bright fruit characters. And also if you don't filter the juice quite so much, then you're also able to have that kind of texture and maybe some of those more mineral elements which might come through as well. So I suppose that sounds to me anyway, JD, like part of the complexity of putting those elements together. I didn't say anything wrong there, did I?
No, that's actually impressive. Well done.
Okay. So with that in mind, I'd also like to talk about another wine that you make. So the Wild House Chenin. So it's gone through this impressive label revamp and a beautiful picture of Bilderberg on one of those ominous looking days which you sometimes have with the clouds rolling over. But I'm again interested to learn about this wine because it being Chenin Blanc, but it's still very much a blend. And it's something which we are doing as a project that's for a wine that's going to be widely available, so quite a large volume. What are some of the challenges in putting together a wine like this?
Well, Mark, I think so. With Wild House, we are applying our Wildeburg philosophy to a wine which has more volume. So it's sometimes easier to have this amazing single vineyard and to make amazing wine from that. Like you said, three barrels of the Wildeburg White. But if you come to the wine like Wild House, you need to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and how are we going to get there? And this morning, with the Paul presentation, we talked about the different areas in Paul which makes up the heart of Wild House. Even if on the label it's Western Cape, but we can come back to that now, why it's Western Cape. But I would say the heart is the Paul, where you get the deep shale soils, which gives you the fleshiness, the structure in the wine. And then on the granite in Paul, you get more granite soils, which give you the freshness, the pithiness, the linearity. And obviously in years like 2019, 2018, when we had big droughts in South Africa, this dryland old bush wines can become quite a lot, for a lot of structure, a lot of complexity, a lot of muscles for a wine like this. And that's why we we will go to the more limey soils at the Breedekloof Valley, where Reino is situated, just to freshen up this Musselman type of wine and just to make it more, I don't want to say commercial, but to make it more, to involve the drinkability of the wine. So like I said, I think, sorry,
Well, if anybody thinks that vintage variation is something that only exists in Europe, would you say that's wrong, JD?
Phew. It sounds like a trick question, Mike. I think in South Africa goes more like this. It's not a big up and down, so more like this. But I must say the last 5 years, and especially in 2021, we had our own challenges in vintage as well. So, but keeps it on the toes, so it's not too bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, absolutely. Well, it's a Wildhouse range is definitely a wine that I'm, particularly personally excited about when I'm showing to customers, and just interesting to know about the huge amount of work that goes into it, because at whatever stage of the process that you're in, whether you're involved in the production side or selling to the customers and trade partners we work with, or whether they're selling it on to their customers and eventually the end consumer, sometimes we think about wines that are more at the entry level as that's the entry level wine, but those are the wines that I think require the most skill, and that are, so in some ways, the most interesting, because they have so many elements going into them, and it's quite easy to pick a list of high-end wines because you just pick your favorites. But this is where I think the hard work really stands out. So it's interesting to be able to discuss some of those elements. So we're going to move on now to yet another country and talk about Hennes. So Colette, with all that in mind, with all this talk about vineyards in Montpellier, or the vineyard areas in Paarl and Breedekloof Valley and so on, how does a little 7-hectare estate on the south coast play into all that? What's your thought about making the Hennes vintage from your site, and how does that inform the blend?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I guess there's a couple of things to pick up on, particularly from what JD said. Because we're a cool climate and we're at the kind of margins of where it's possible to grow grapes, we invariably don't have the luxury of doing 2 picks. You can't wait 2 or 3 weeks for the sugars to rise or the acidity to drop, because you run out of season, basically. And so to a certain extent, we use the varieties a lot more to play with. So because we're doing sparkling, we're focused on Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And then we also work across sites to minimize the risk and reduce the risks. And really, those 3 varieties for us, we have less scope than perhaps you do in some of the big blends that you can get from France. But those 3 varieties all work in harmony with each other. So everything has a role to play. The Chardonnay brings freshness and ageability to the wine. The Pinot Noir brings structure, red berry fruit. Pinot Meunier softens up the blend and helps the wines kind of be a little bit quicker to market. And so, again, going back to what you said, it starts in the vineyard. You can only make a blend based on what you've got planted. So you're not going to make a 70% dominant blend if you've only got 30% of your vineyard planted with Pinot Meunier. So it does start there. You work with your varieties, and then touching on the vintage variation. England is like this in terms of variation every year. The weather is bonkers. And so a key part for us is now building up reserve wines and working out how those reserve wines can go into the blend, so that you can soften the edges of that variability year after year. And if you've got a high acidity year, you want to bring in some reserve wines that are going to mellow those edges. Or if you've got a ripe year like 2020, you might be looking for your reserve wines from a higher acidity year to kind of pep the blend up a little bit and bring some different structure to it. So we aren't blessed with the sheer hectareage that other parts of the world are. So everything's on a smaller scale, but to a certain extent, you have to look at different pools to be able to manage what you've got. So we look at it from a different perspective when it comes to sparkling. The vintage, for example, is a vintage wine. It's only made in vintage years. And so, and in the years that we want to, so 2014 is our current vintage. It's designed to be longer aging, so it's just Chardonnay 70% and Pinot Noir 30%. There's no Meunier in this, but a little bit like has been touched on to a certain extent. The vintage wines are easier to blend because you can say we did the very best blend from that vintage and it's awesome. The trick actually is the non-vintage blends where you've got more volume, and as Samantha was saying, you want that consistency year after year, and that's really hard to achieve on something that is your entry level price on your bigger volume. So the art really is, as you say, kind of on those bigger volumes, reaching that consistency when you perhaps don't have as much artistic license to go, this is the one I wanted to make, and it's awesome.
There is, yes, please. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Mike, sorry to intervene. I mean, I'm sharing these exercises with Colette, with GD, with Samantha, and I'd like to inject a little information in the middle of this presentation. These people have a special skill. They can play back to the future each time they blend. And I think that's an explanation we forgot somewhere. When Samantha makes Cuvée Jean-Paul, she's not only doing the blend for today on the bottling that takes place in 2 weeks' time, she thinks about what's going to be the wine in 6 months' time. When GD aged the wine, put a drop of the oaky Wildebert into his Chenin, he thinks about the special touch, special texture it will give to the blend. And when Colette, even Worth, does a blend, she has to consider what's going to happen in this blend in 2 to 3 years' time. Hence my back to the future. But you have to understand that we don't do the blend for today. We always have to guess what's going to be the evolution of the blend on the wine later on. So next time we do art of blending, we should have a back to the future.
I think we'd like that. I think Felix is working on something as we speak. Actually, he's probably put JD's head on in the car. I'll be ready before he's finished. Actually, I mean, and just to touch on that briefly. I went to, as I say, I don't live very far away from Hennes, and joined Colette for a little blending exercise, and we'll talk about that later. The idea of blending wine, and particularly bottle fermented sparkling wine, when it's still a baby, when it's still in its component parts, is it's sort of like driving to a destination where you don't know exactly where you're going without a map. You kind of think, how am I don't really know how I'm going to get there, and at least that's what I feel like, but this is where all your experience comes in, is that after doing that year after year, you'll maybe get a little bit closer to that. Then just to go back to Hennes, Colette. So even though you're on a boutique site, this is very much a boutique product. Are there things that will help you to sort of show differences in the wines that can be useful? I'm thinking about potentially some of the either different sites or different clones, and maybe some words to say about how those can help you when putting blends together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little bit like a kind of orchestra, really. And you've got so many different elements that you can draw on. So the site, absolutely. There's a lot of talk of Chardonnay, and particularly grown on chalk in England. It has this real kind of steely minerality. Hennes is actually on clay, and we tend to find that brings a richness to the Pinots and a real fruitiness to them, which really works well in the blends. So we've got different combinations of rootstocks and clones planted for that perspective, and we do work with growers from different counties, so that we can, as I said, kind of spread that variability and minimise the risk a little bit. But then throughout the process, it's about making the press cut and deciding which portion of the juice you're keeping free run versus press. As JD said, it's fermentation temperatures. It's whether you're going stainless steel or oak, to put them through mallow or not through mallow, and then which of those varieties and tanks do you think suit the different blends that you're pulling together in any given year. So there's lots of different strings that you can pull on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they even though it might seem like it would be very subtle, the difference that trying base wines from Chardonnay in England grown on chalk or on clay are actually remarkably different wines, and so it does as you say add a huge amount of variability and options there. So JD, I'd like to talk to you about your more boutique project and talk to you about one of my favourite wines in the whole of the Boutinot portfolio, will be a Bilderberg Terroir Chenin. So focusing on we can discuss the site and how amazing and unique they are, but in the sort of, because of brevity of time, I'd like to talk to you about the winemaking. So what if you take us through the process from pressing through to putting it in the bottle, what are some of the key elements for the winemaking in the Terroir Chenin that you think add to a blend, a wine which, more or less we make 3,000 bottles a year of?
Well, Mike, to be totally honest, I think with this wines, we call it lazy winemaking. We really don't do much in the winery. 100% honest here. So I think if you have to go back to the vineyards, and the reason why you choose this, the Terroir Chenin is 2 vineyards, as you know, called Eensaamheid, which means loneliness, and happiness, Blijdschap. So it's a blend between loneliness and happiness. But both these vineyards are planted on granite soil in the Panelists area. So the reason what we believe is Chenin tastes like is this more fresher style rather than the big, bold that I grew up with and I was used to back in the days. Winemaking wise, I think the big, call it the little blocks that we do in 3,000 bottles is barrel, choice of barrel. We only do 500 and 600 litre barrels, but we do about 4 different cooperages. And then we also do from new barrel to 5th full barrel. So just to give you that components when we sit down in November, and usually when Eric and Robin can come over and we sit around a nice table and we taste all the wines, and then we just, at least we've got all this little blocks that we can build. Even if it's only 3,000 bottles, I think it's quite important to have this choices at the end of the year when you do blending.
Mm-hmm. And you're a big fan of the Stockinger barrels as well. What does something like that add as a component to this wine?
Well, the Stockinger we only use in the Bilderberg white.
Okay.
Yeah, so we focus on French barrels on the that we find just works with the that we work with on Chenin. But like I said, bigger formats. So the Stockinger we really focus on our Semillons, and it works well with the older bush wines that we work with the Bilderberg white.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so we shall now whiz over back to France to talk about the Petit Shah rosé. So rosé is a hugely interesting category in terms of blending, because there is the one element which is really important and has been much more so recently is getting a consistency of color. So not only to get a wine which tastes delicious, which is fresh, but also something which is the appropriate color and a consistent color throughout the year as well, which is yet another challenge. So Samantha, if you could talk about some of the winemaking elements in Petit Shah Rosé that are important for you, I think that would be really interesting.
I think one of the key points that you actually mentioned was the colour, because we've seen over the past years that the colour requisite has changed in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
So whilst we're working very much on the same grape varieties, which are predominantly Grenache and Cinsault, Grenache and Cinsault with a blob of Syrah, the actual vinification techniques over the past years have had to be adapted to release a more vibrant, paler style of rosé. So we start with different elements. We start with the separate varietals vinified separately, and then we work out how we want to blend them to create the colour panel and the flavour profile. So we have a double job here. It's not just flavour, it really is colour and flavour that come to the fore. So the blending work is huge, because you can have some wines that are absolutely delicious in their own right from a flavour point of view, but when you line them up in the glass and you look at the colours, you think, oh no, we can't use that. No matter how good it is, we can't use it. So you have to go back to the drawing board and start again. So sometimes our tasting room looks a bit like a rainbow, because we have a whole load of bottles and a whole load of glasses all lined up, and we will go for flavour and texture first, and then work out if it matches from the colour point of view.
And the magic that Samantha brings quite often is you taste all the components. One of the wines is not showing something absolutely magical, but the reality is that this specific wine is just bringing the difference in the blend. And I would say that it just matches the flavors, the tannins, the acidity. And this component that on its own is not wow, finally in the blend makes the difference. And this is where Samantha and Guillaume are bringing their skills and experience.
That to me is key to what we call the art of blending, because you can have a multitude of separate elements that will speak to you in different ways, and it is only through putting some of these different elements together that you create something that has personal identity, I mean Boutinot identity, and is actually better than any of the individual elements that you will have lined up on the tasting table. And to me, that is the success of making our I'm going to say our large volume entry level wines suitable for the marketplace, is because there's a huge amount of work that goes into them, and they are far better than any of the single elements that we would have lined up.
And how much of it is the case that you are making wines in order to create it as a specific blending element, and versus arriving in a winery or it just being a case of, well, this is also available? It must be, I suppose, some kind of combination of two, that you're making wines specifically to become parts of a blend, or part of the other story is using.
It really depends on the finished product that we're seeking to make, and the volume that is required for that finished product throughout the year. So with some wines, we'll have we'll know a profile, and that profile can be obtained through the vinification. But with other wines, when we know we need a larger volume, we'll seek elements that actually are pristine, clean wines in their own right, that will then work together, as I said earlier, as a jigsaw puzzle to create something that is far more complete. So I like the analogy you used earlier. You're in a car without a map. You know where you've got to go, but you're not too sure how you're going to get there. And we can only do that by having a whole series of elements from different areas, from different growers.
Absolutely.
And that we do by travelling. We don't sit just and taste in our office. We actually get in our cars and we go out to different parts of France. And we go and see growers, and we taste with growers.
I on the rosé specifically, you know, I've been on judging panels and so on, where and have seen that color difference change, and just the importance of how color is almost above all in terms of rosé production. And but sadly, once even it might look a pretty pale pink color, that's not really very comforting if the wine is a bit boring and a bit flat and uninteresting. So I am not jealous of you having to make wines which just have a delicate color, and also wines which are very expressive of fruit and freshness as well, and texture. So yes, I definitely commend you for being able to put those things together. So, and the next thing, staying on France, another really interesting wine, and something which is a slightly more off-the-wall project, a slightly more exciting label, is Uva Non Grata White, but a delicious wine, something which is, there aren't that many wines in that sort of medium dry style that are really in the marketplace, but this absolutely has a home, and flavor-wise, it's an absolutely delicious drink. Has that real combination of sort of zesty acidity, tons of fruit, and a rich sweetness, but with a nice clean finish. So how do the winemaking elements play a part in this role?
That was a huge jigsaw puzzle. I've been traveling to Gascony for many years for the Cuvée Jean Paul sourcing, and over the past few years, Gros Monson has come to the fore as being a great variety that has really great texture, flavour and huge interest. And it was, how can we create a wine and get it into bottle that people will want to drink? So for several years, I tried to encourage the commercial team to say, yeah, we'll list a Gros Morson, but we never quite got round to it. So the latest development was, you go and taste different Gros Morson and you tell me what you want and we'll make it.
Yes.
So the UK commercial team got a whole range of Gros Morson from different parts of France and tasted and came up with their ideal blend using wines from the Jurançon, using wines from Gascony, using wines from all different regions where you are simply not allowed to mix and blend. But they said, this is what we want. So I went off with my bottle and got it analysed. So we got the acid structure, we got the sugar structure. Obviously, from the nose structure, that's just something that I love. So Gros Morson in Gascony was the place to go. And this wine is actually made from a blend of a dry Gros Morson and a Moelleux within one cellar, but two very, very different wines being blended together to create something that is just absolutely lovable, delicious, and I think perfect balance, because you don't realise quite the sugar level that is in the wine because of the balance with the acidity. And you just have an explosion of mandarin, Seville orange, guavas, kumquats, everything to do with the sort of the almost marmalade in a bottle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And the label goes with it because it is something that is just so different. So if you haven't tasted it, I need to encourage you to taste it, because you sit down and open the bottle and before you realise it, it's actually all gone.
Yeah, I can confirm that also happens with the red as well. So it's a wonderful pair. I think that, and that's a great example of how wines can be market led, and that we are putting you're putting together a blend, but in order to meet a demand, and not on the sense that somebody says, well, I want to have a Shiraz Grenache blend at this price, but that I want to have a wine which is delicious and fruity and has this lovely richness and intensity, which is in many ways quite a broad and broad statement to make, but is something that is those two elements of the sort of commercial side and the winemaking team working hand in hand, which is excellent.
So that's an assemblage of experiences and requirements.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, assemblage in French is our word for blending. Yeah. Assemblage sounds much nicer, rolls off the tongue in a much nicer way than blending. That's
often the case with the French, as we said earlier. Okay, so speaking of, we're gonna go from a wine which is something of some different components to something which is really a very, very small production, and talk about a jewel in the crown, the Bilderberg White. So JD, how can a wine which is you may only make 900 bottles of in 2019 be a blend?
Sure. Okay, Mike. So obviously there's so many consistent components in this wine. The barrels are consistent. We only use Austrian oak. The vineyards are quite consistent. So how can we call this a blend? The answer on that is just if you look at 2021, what we did. So we did two pickings. In this Semillon block, there's actually a lot of Semillon Gris. That's a natural mutation of the grape. So we kept the Semillon Gris separate, and we put it only with one component to see what the Semillon Gris actually add to the blend. And and then once again, each barrel we do trials with the percentage lees we put back into the barrel. So that's anything from 2% to 10%. And the other component, or the consistent component, is everything is naturally fermented. So we're quite excited about tasting the 2021 vintage later this year, because there is, in the small production, there's so much variables that we can work with there.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's I think a fascinating wine, and it's interesting that I think that the variety itself is something which is which is hugely underrated, and within the market sort of fine wine, which this definitely deserves to be in that category. The scores and the reviews and all the medals and everything definitely reflect that. But when I was in South Africa and speaking with JD and asking the very straightforward question, what are the best wines that you can make in Franschhoek? And it's Semillon is a very clear, no need to think about what the answer is. This is the best thing that we can do here, and it's encouraging to see that, that it's not a case of, well, it could be this, or we'll try and make you happy and maybe hedge our bets. It's a very clear answer, and I think that the results speak for themselves. So there's very, very little of it, but it's all very special, and still with interesting to see how those different elements, even in a micro form compared to a sort of a huge blend, all play an important role. So yeah, that's absolutely interesting and fascinating. Thinking about if we put all those elements of the winemaking together, whether it be different press fractions or different temperatures of fermentation and different uses of barrels, and of course all the elements of where we source the grapes from in the vineyards, we could have put together our final wine. However, in the world of sparkling wine, there's two things to say. The first is that they have the challenge of having to put together their wine before the second fermentation. So the still wine is put into the bottle, and the sugar and yeast is added for the second fermentation, and then the wine will be ready some 3 or so years into the future. But they do also get the chance to tinker or to do some final tweaks with dosage, which is not just about sweetness. You may also have the chance to add an oaked component or some other element to the wine. So talking about all of those things, Colette, I'm going to bring you on board to talk about the challenges of blending sparkling wine from putting those base wines together, and specifically about dosage. So what are the elements in there that you consider important in blending?
So we're pulling together the blends at the moment for the 2020 sparkling base wines, and I guess, I've touched on the fact we've got the different varieties, and then we've got the reserve wines, but perhaps worth drawing attention to is the fact that these are still wines, so there's no bubbles in them at this point. For sparkling wine, we specifically try and produce quite neutral base wines, because the magic of sparkling comes from the aging and the contact with yeast. So actually what we're tasting is a variety of wines that have been essentially encouraged to have very little flavor. So that makes blending quite challenging. Then add to that the fact that these are naturally high acidity wines with low pH. Blending them can be, it's loads of fun. That's why I love it, but it can be quite challenging. And I know that when we send them over to France, sometimes I think we've all got healthy dental plans now, haven't we? Because this stuff can be like battery acid. It can strip the enamel, so it limits the amount you can taste in any one go. Because these wines, they can taste a little hostile, to be honest. But beyond that, as you said earlier, Mike, it's quite amazing. Once you calibrate yourself to what base wines taste like, you begin to see beyond the acidity, and you're looking for the wines that have got structure or length or fruit or the ageability. And when we're blending, we're trying to imagine what these wines are going to be like in 2-3 years' time, when they've had all of that aging with yeast, when they've got the bubble in them, when they've spent time under cork. And so, as Eric said earlier, it is like back to the future. And so experience comes into it. You taste your back vintages and you see how they've developed. Have they turned out the way you expected? So you're constantly honing what you're doing. But then, as you say, when we go through the final process of disgorgement, which is when the yeast is removed from the bottle and the cork is added, we do have the opportunity to tweak the wine. So if all's gone well during second fermentation, all of that sugar that's been added will have been used up, and what you'll have is a dry sparkling wine with pretty high acidity, but ageability, and aging softens that acidity. And so we'll do trials with sugar for the dosage, but as you said, you can play around with other things. So Historically, brandy was often used in the dosage. We use some reserve wines that we trial to see, wines that are already on lees. If you've got an older wine, you can blend in just a little bit of newer tank wine to kind of pep the wine up. But in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about maybe adding 2 or 3 milliliters per bottle. It's a tiny, tiny amount that you're working within the margins here. And everything that you add to the wine at that point changes the direction of the wine. So again, you trial to see what the impact is going to be before you release that wine. Mm-hmm. So we do have the opportunity to kind of go back and tweak, but it can't cover a bad wine. If the balance isn't there, you can't recover it. So the work is very much done at blending stage.
Absolutely. I did hear the expression that dosage is not about sweetening; it's more seasoning, which I think is a nice way to think about the process. And it's remarkable to me as well the how important that process is. That even the difference of perhaps a few grams of sugar or one element can make such a big difference. And I'm a huge advocate and enthusiast with English sparkling wine, and I've been sort of involved in the English industry for a little while, and I think this style is absolutely I'm gonna make Colette blush, but the perfect, fresh, modern iteration of English sparkling wine, because it has a focus on the fruit while still maintaining what is this sort of fresh, zesty style with a nice high acidity. But the dosage is actually relatively low, but that really works to create this lovely linear, bright style, and something that I think is absolutely appropriate as a sort of modern iteration of English sparkling wine. And it won a gold medal at the IWC as well. So that's a wonderful bit of feedback for all the hard work which I think goes into this. So really, that is a good place to end as a wrap up on the different elements of the blending process. And I think that we've covered off in a short space of time. I've tried to get some stories out from all the different winemakers who we're very fortunate to have here today, and lots of things that even I'm not aware of the stories and the effort that go into producing these things. So there's definitely a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, and a lot to learn in terms of how all these are put together with all the different elements. So it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you all today. And any final comments before we wrap up this session?
We just have to go back to the future now.
Yes, and do more jigsaw puzzles. I think that's a good thing. It's a good place to end. So, well, thank you once again for your time to all of you, and hope Vintage keeps on working out well, JD, for you. And thank you to everybody who joined us from around the world.
Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, Mike.